Hi, I'm Nicole, and today we are going to be making bone broth, one of my new favorite things. If you would have asked me if I would drink bone broth, 10 years ago, I probably would have said, never in my life will I drink that. That is really, really gross. But here I am today making bone broth. It's a lot more cost effective to make your own bone broth than to buy store-bought, and it's also gonna be a lot more nutritious. You're gonna get a lot more out of it. So we're gonna start with roasted bones, and I'll kind of talk about things as we're going through. I roasted these for about 45 minutes at 400 degrees this morning, and that's just gonna give it more of like a robust flavor. You can do it without being roasted. I'm using frozen, 100% grass-fed bones that I got from a local farm. So I know exactly where it came from. I may have even at one point pet the cow that these bones came from, which is a little bit weird. I'm trying to explain that to my 3-year-old right now. So I'm putting all my bones in. You'll notice I have different cuts, just beautiful there, nice roasted. Then I'm gonna also add in a few veggies. Honestly, you can throw in whatever you have around. If you like carrots, put a couple carrots in. If you like celery, throw a little bit of celery in there, which is what I'm gonna do. So I've already washed these, dried these. You don't have to worry about cutting anything off the edge. I am going to cut them in half though. But first I'm gonna show you how to just quickly sharpen your knife. Most of you probably have one of these handy little utensils in your kitchen. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just go down and then away from me and then towards me. So I'm just gonna do that about 4 times. And then, like Eric talked about, I am going to just protect my fingers by cutting with my knuckles there, and I'm just gonna cut those in half so they fit a little bit more nicely in my pot. So it's a pretty simple, you throw whatever you have around in there. You could honestly just do the bones and water and it would still taste great, but I'm gonna add in a few more things like an onion in there just to give it a little bit of added flavor. So I'm gonna just cut off the end there on both sides, unwrap it, and then same thing. You could either do half of an onion if you really like onion flavor. I'm also just gonna peel off that outer edge, or you could do a whole onion. This is a smaller onion, so I'm just gonna peel this here and throw it in the pot. You can throw in any spices that you have or herbs. I'm gonna use a little bit of fresh herbs today. So I'm throwing in my onion that I cut in half. I'm also gonna throw in some peppercorn. So I've measured out about a tablespoon of peppercorn, so I'm gonna throw those in. I'm not gonna add salt because there's already a lot of delicious salt in the bones, so you can always add salt later, but I find that it's better to wait until the end once you've tasted it. I'm also gonna toss in some apple cider vinegar. This is raw, unfiltered, so you'll notice there's lots of good stuff in the bottom there. That is just gonna be some more probiotics. And then I'm also gonna throw in a few fresh sprigs of rosemary. So we keep a lot of herbs at our house, and so I'm just gonna take a couple of these off there. And then when you're straining it, all of this will strain out, so you don't have to worry about cutting anything too small. So now that I have everything in there, oh, I forgot my garlic. So we're gonna add in a couple cloves of garlic because who doesn't love garlic? So I'm just gonna smush it and peel it here. If you have one of those awesome garlic peelers, even better, but I'm just gonna smush it a little bit, peel it off, toss it in. So the great thing about bone broth is you can use this in so many different things. You can use this in soups, you can drink it. I think drinking it hot is best. You can freeze it for later. You can really use it anything. You can use it anytime basically a recipe calls for water, you can add it in. So why drink bone broth, you ask? Well, let me just show you what this looks like here. I got everything in there, and depending on the size of your pot, you are just gonna fill it to wherever it says the max line is. We wanna maximize how much broth we get. So we're doing it in a smaller Instapot. I have a couple different sizes. This is my smaller one here. And I'm using about 1.5 to 2 pounds of bones right now. So I'm just filling it up with filtered water. It can be room temperature, it can be cold. It doesn't really matter. We don't have to be picky about it. And I'm just gonna fill it up here until it gets to the max line. So now that I have my water filled to the line there, I'm gonna put that in. So again, I put in quite a few ingredients here, but you could keep it really simple. You could just put in bones and water. You don't have to roast it. You don't have to put any of these veggies in if you don't like those flavors, but these are just gonna enhance the flavor of the broth. So I have put in a few extra things. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna put my lid on. So I am using a pressure cooker today. However, you can use a slow cooker. Just know that it's gonna take a little bit longer. It takes about 18 to 24 hours for all of the nutrients and the flavor to come out of the bones if you're in a slow cooker. However, using a pressure cooker is just gonna speed up that process. So this is gonna be 3 hours. Sometimes I do it a little bit more, sometimes I do it a little bit less depending on time. I find that 3 hours is optimum for flavor at minimum. So if you want to do a little bit more, go for it. You can also let it cook and then let it sit for a long time until it cools. It will take a long time to cool. So I am going to put my lid here on and just make sure that it is sealed. The nice thing about pressure cookers is it won't let you even turn on or do anything until everything is sealed up. So I'm gonna go ahead and put in soup and broth, and it's automatically set for 318. So I'm just gonna leave it there and it'll just start, and you'll notice it'll take a while to pressurize. And that's totally fine. So that's just kind of, you have to calculate that in. So it'll start to beep to let you know that the pressure is starting to build. So why bone broth, you're asking, is like, I don't really like the flavor. Couple of things. It's really, really, really good for your joints. So maybe instead of taking joint supplements, you could consider adding in bone broth into your diet. It is great for collagen, glucosamine. There's so many benefits to it. It's also a really good side thing to add in to pretty much anything that you're cooking. So if I'm cooking, vegetables, I could add it in, and it's just gonna be that extra boost of nutrients that are coming from a source that not from a factory where it's been ground up and stored on a shelf for who knows how long. So I am a big proponent for bone broth, and I highly suggest that you add it into your diet. So we are gonna let this cook for about 3 hours, and then I'm gonna show you how the process works when the bone broth is complete. So it's been about 3 hours, and now we are going to depressurize the Instapot. If you're doing this in a slow cooker, obviously you wouldn't have to do this. So I'm gonna get tongs. You just wanna be very careful if you've used an Instapot before that you stay away, because steam burns are not fun. So I'm gonna use my tongs, also put on some gloves, even though it's a little bit nerdy, as I let the steam come out. So now that the bone broth has depressurized, I am going to take my little vent off, and then I am going to open it up here. And we are just gonna smell that amazing aroma of the broth. So you just wanna be very careful with bone broth, just like anything hot, but bone broth especially is incredibly hot. It will be hotter than even boiling water. So what I'm gonna do is very carefully, you can even leave this for a little bit, let it cool off. It's not gonna hurt it at all. But once you're ready, you're going to get some gloves and very carefully take it out. I like to set it down for a moment first, and then that way I can get a good grip before I'm gonna strain it. So you just wanna make sure that you have a big enough bowl to catch all the bone broth so you don't lose any of the goodness. So I'm now going to take and strain it here. And like I said, I would wear gloves with this. Just be very careful because it's incredibly hot. And also just be careful if you're using a metal bowl like I am. Oh, and look at those delicious bones. So you can redo bone broth with the same bones. If you'd like, it's a more cost-effective option. I don't think you get quite as much flavor the second time around, but you're welcome to try it. You would just do the same process through with the same bones. So once all of this is strained here, I have everything here. I am just gonna let this cool for a little bit and put this here. Like I said, just be careful as you're doing this. Bone broth is a little bit messy because of all the fat in it. So I have my finished bone broth here. You'll notice it's very kind of thick and gelatinous, which is good because that's a lot of the good fat and collagen in there. So when you are storing your bone broth, there's a couple of things that are helpful to know. A lot of people have, including myself, have at some point frozen bone broth, and then as it was defrosting, the glass broke. So a way to prevent that from happening if you are gonna freeze your bone broth is to refrigerate it overnight once it's cooled down to room temperature, and then the next day put it in the freezer. And that way the glass doesn't expand and shrink as it's freezing and defrosting. So I like to use these mason jars, wide mouth. It's easy to pour. You could use short, you could use tall ones, whatever you want. I find this is the perfect size. And so what I do is once it cools off enough, I'll put it into these, and then I usually keeps in the fridge for about 4 to 5 days. And then the rest of it I'll usually freeze the next day in order to, just prolong it. This is a lot of bone broth. So if you have a big family, you may go through all in one batch without having to freeze any of it if you drink a lot of it, or if you're using this to cook. This would be a great replacement for things like chicken stock, veggie stock, anytime a recipe calls for that. If you use bone broth instead, you're gonna get a lot more nutrients, and you're also gonna get a lot more flavor than if you use like a store-bought veggie stock or chicken broth or whatever it is that you find, in those boxed aisles. So this is a great substitute for that. Like I said, also just drinking this. I would suggest just heating it up in a mug each day, at least half a cup, and sipping on it. It takes a little bit of getting used to with the flavors, but it's super healthy and a great option for anything that has to do with like your joints. If you are taking a joint supplement now, this would be a great replacement for that. So one other thing to note is this is what your bone broth is gonna look like after you refrigerate it or defrost it. So you'll notice there's like a layer of fat on top, and that's good. You don't wanna strain that out. That's some of the collagen as well. So what I do is I usually shake it up and try to break that up, and then I pour it in my mug. You can heat it up on the stovetop, in the microwave, whatever is easy. And like I said, if you wanna drink it cold, go for it, but I don't think very many people like cold broth, so it's usually best warmed up to drink on its own. So hopefully you learned a lot from this. Like I said, making your own bone broth is a lot more cost-effective option than buying store-bought, and also a lot more nutritious.